Hey everyone, Harry here, and believe it or not, the United States has returned an unlawfully and mistakenly deported immigrant and bowed to the order, the very stern order of Judge Murphy. We talked about this at the time, but let me just reset the table here a little bit. So, OCG is a gay man who was living in Guatemala, where he was suffering a lot of persecution. So was his claim, and wanted to get to the United States. He comes north to the United States, and in Mexico, he is again subject to brutal treatment. And as he asserts, it's because of his sexual orientation, but he is sexually assaulted. He is kidnapped, essentially, held for ransom, totally beaten up, terrible situation, and then arrives in the United States. Arrives in the United States and asks for asylum, and a judge holds, you can have asylum. I'm ordering, don't send him back to his home of Guatemala because he's going to suffer persecution there. And within very short time, the U.S. says, okay, we're sending him back to Mexico. And they indeed send him back to Mexico by the time the court finds out about it. And this is brought in Massachusetts before Judge Murphy. Judge Murphy by then is the third judge to have gotten wind of how fast and loose, that's too nice really, how lawless the administration has been in just sending people out without any kind of due process. And he makes the same basic findings that Judge Zinnes has made about Abrego Garcia, Judge Boasberg about a putative class of immigrants whom the U.S. wants to deport. But he is much more, I would say, he shows his peak more. Nevertheless, the U.S. gives a sworn statement saying, in contrast to what he's hearing from OCG's lawyer, we asked him and he said he didn't have a problem with going to Mexico. So on that basis, he doesn't make an immediate order, Murphy, but he says, I'm going to take some discovery, figure out what's going on. In the meantime, I won't do a stay. And a debacle ensues for the United States, where basically after a few weeks, they have to come back, tail between their legs, and say, oops, we can't find anyone who actually heard OCG say, I don't mind about going to Mexico. Looks like we kind of blew that one. That's just a remarkable humiliation. You know, you went and represented to the judge, here's what is going on, and he said he's fine with Mexico, and it was at best, a complete screw up, and at worst, you know, some kind of manufacturing of evidence. At this point, Murphy hits the roof, and he issues an order. I want him back, and I want him to get due process. And we talked about it at the time because it did have, as you have to have, I keep mentioning this, if somehow getting him back from Mexico would be, start a world war, there's, you'd have to give a nod to the administration. But Murphy came like within, spitting distance of saying, get him back. Don't facilitate, don't effectuate, get him back. And given the incredibly uncomfortable position the Department of Justice was in, their lawyers, it's changing a little, but to date they've been just, kicked in the rear, put in front of court with nothing to say, and even sometimes, as for this luckless person, representing something's false, they basically capitulated, or so it seemed. They said, but this was like a week ago, so the question was, how would they follow through? We're going to take efforts to charter a plane to bring him back, and bring him back actually from Guatemala, because by this point he feared and loathed Mexico more, and he got Mexico to send him back to Guatemala. But his position in front of the court was, look, I'll go, you can deport me, but just not to Mexico or Guatemala, in either case of which I'll face persecution and worse, torture and the like. So the U.S. says, we'll charter a plane to get him back from Guatemala. Like, days have passed, raising the question, what does it take for the most powerful nation in the history of the world to get a plane and bring them back? You know, they were making noise about, well, we want it to be first for efficiency, presumably a plane that already has deportees. It's going down there, and we'll put them in there for the trip back. But, you know, basically it wasn't happening, although it seemed to me, and I talked to you about this and wrote about it, they got no room to wriggle out of this one. What are they going to say? You know, the no planes are left. The weather's bad. The dog ate it. You know, they said, we're getting a plane. They got to get a plane. And sure enough, they got a plane. And sure enough, OCG is now back in the United States. Now he's back in Arizona at a detention facility, and the order from Murphy, and this applies across the board, is he has to get due process. Now, I don't think, as reading the course of proceedings, that he's even saying I shouldn't be deported, but he is saying I have a well-founded fear of persecution. Don't send me to Mexico and don't send me to Guatemala. Regardless, whatever he's saying, he'll now have a chance to say it. Now, don't be surprised if he says it and the United States and a judge hear it and say, okay, we're redeporting you, but presumably here, not to Mexico or Guatemala, given the record he'll be able to bring to bear, the rape and the kidnap and everything else. It would be stunningly callous and I think counterproductive for the U.S. to now insist we're going to send him back to either Mexico or Guatemala. But nevertheless, all they get is process. It's exactly what they've been claiming, a modest claim that in some ways, that the administration has denied to all of them by just rushing them in planes and, you know, in Kafka-esque fashion, as I talked about in my other YouTube this morning with Boasberg. And that's what's anathema to the courts. So it's very possible that the bottom line remains the same, but from constitutional vantage point, the bottom line between sending someone secret with no due process and sending someone after they get due process in habeas really is night and day, or you could say democracy versus authoritarian nightmare. So OCG is back the first time the administration has done so, and presumably some internal battles were fought within the administration, and they, you know, understand they've got to give some ground. They can't send their lawyers in to be decapitated by federal judges. So the next one may be easier. They can no longer cross their arms and say, we'll never listen to judges. They listened to one here. They brought someone home. That person's claims of well-founded fear of prosecution, which is what gives you either asylum or the ability not to get sent in a particular place, will be heard. My best guess would be will be validated. And, you know, doesn't mean he'll get to stay. It just means the Constitution prevails in the United States of America. A modest achievement, but a humongous one in another way of looking at it, because it's the difference between, you know, basically the possible end of constitutional rule and the reaffirmation of democratic rule. Talk to you later. Thanks for tuning in. If you enjoyed this video and other Talking Feds content, please take a second to like and subscribe. Talk to you later.